Hi, I'm Tim. Welcome to Watch You Want, and thanks for logging on. Today I have something that's more than a little bit special, and whether or not you're well read on your vintage Rolex, you'll know that this reference 1680, so-called Red Submariner, is a special timepiece. Often called the ideal entry into vintage Rolex, the Red Submariner, produced from the inception of 1680 date Submariner production in 1966 to around early 1974, represents something of a treasure trove for collectors who are getting into the vintage Rolex scene, with several dial variations available and accessible timepieces that are still quite reasonably priced by vintage Rolex standards. The Rolex Submariner with the red printed dial offers an iconic Rolex look with the allure of true vintage. And this example, featuring what's known as the Mark VI dial, represents an outstanding specimen of the type. Now, I want to talk about the fit of the watch, but that's really elementary and secondary to the appeal of the watch as a true vintage piece in rare condition. Now, on my wrist, 6 1/3 inches, 16 centimeters in circumference. Like all vintage Rolex models, the 40mm stainless steel watch wears light, it wears wieldy, it wears low to the wrist, but you can see that characteristic high domed acrylic plexiglass. That's part of the charm of vintage, and it's part of the look and the feel and the ambiance that you don't get on a modern Rolex. As beautifully built as they are today, there is something of a character loss compared to the vintage pieces and the romance of the classic golden era sports watch from Rolex. Now, the Red Submariner is a specific class of vintage Rolex that has a couple of sub-variants and sub-breeds. Now, first and foremost, I want to emphasize the fact that this watch has what's known as the Mark VI dial, with 6 different Red Submariner dials identified, plus a 7th that is a Rolex factory service replacement for the red printed dial. There are nuances, things like whether or not Red Submariner print is on white ink, that is red on top of white ink, or printed directly to the dial, whether the 6s, the actual curves and interlocking lines of the 6 are closed or open, whether the meters or the feet are first. There are a lot of variations, right down to whether the S of superlative chronometer is flat or curved. Many distinctions, a lot to take in, but I want to give you a rundown on what makes a Mark VI a Mark VI. First and foremost, there's the serial number. Late 3 millions to early 4 millions. So that's your range. So this watch would have been produced in approximately 1973 as a 3.7 million range. Moreover, when you look at Submariner here, this example features the red print directly onto the black of the dial. The 6s are closed with feet first, that is 660 feet prior to 200 meters when read left to right, and the S, the actual curved S of superlative chronometer, is curved on its bottom rather than flattened out. There are a lot of distinctions that are used to tell one Red Submariner from another, and this is what's known as the Mark VI. I can describe these distinctions, but the best thing to do is to take a look at the high-resolution images of this watch on our website, Watch You Want, because that'll really give you the in-depth look at what makes this red sub a red sub and this Mark VI a Mark VI. What I will say is that the dial itself is exceptionally clean and original, and that's where all pretty much of the value of a vintage Rolex is invested. Now, vintage Rolex is all about details, and dial is paramount. Physically, mechanically, many of them are fairly interchangeable, so the collector interest is in the rarity, the condition, and the definition of the dial. And this original tritium Mark VI dial is in outstanding condition. Now, tritium patina isn't always even or regular. Depending on how the material degrades, you're going to get different degrees of patina. This one has a very light patina, but the good thing is it's even, so it's not as though some of the indices have aged to a dark brown and the others are white. They're all a very light cream color. Now, the watch does have a couple of elements that are not original, and I want to get those out right up front, because with vintage Rolex, disclosure is key. The key element of this watch that makes it outstanding is the dial. Secondarily, an outstandingly clean caliber 1575 movement, and very minimally refinished, if at all. Stainless steel case are the highlights. The bezel is a factory service bezel in as much as the Luminova still glows. The hands are factory Luminova service hands. The bracelet is a model 93-150, so this being a 1988 bracelet, it's in outstanding condition. It's not truly period correct to the timepiece, but the good thing is, being outstanding in appearance and outstanding in function, it's very substantial, and it's an outstanding daily wearer. If you want a vintage Rolex that you can wear routinely, you want a bracelet that's more contemporary than the folded links that came with the watch at the time. This is more substantial. Again, not period correct, however, it is appropriate to the Submariner model. Now, the watch features a dial that is to die for, but I don't want to undersell the caliber of the case or the movement inside. But let's start with the case first. The thing about vintage Rolex is that the cases are not just pared down and spare compared to contemporary models, but they featured a lot more hand finishing out of the factory. And the fuller the lugs, the fuller the crown guards, the more pronounced these features, the less the watch has been polished. And you can see here, abundant original beveling remains intact, as well as abundant original metal on the lugs themselves. You can't add metal back to the watch, so when you see very full lugs, shapely lugs, when you see evidence of the original beveling on a Submariner from this era, you know that it's led a pretty charmed life and a benign existence. If it has been refinished or polished, it's been done sparingly and by expert hands. Now, the other nice thing about this watch is the movement. Rolex Chronometer caliber 1575 inside. The 1575 really debuted with the 1680. With the jump date, it was a 19,800 vibration per hour movement, COSC spec from the beginning. So you've got that chronometer certification and you've got the jump date for the first time on the 1680 model. What this one has, dated to the early 70s as it is the unusual for a red sub hacking feature. Now, it's by no means a hen's teeth or a needle in a haystack feature, but it's a nice mechanical refinement that Rolex added to its chronometer spec movements in the early 70s. So to be able to stop the balance, stop the seconds, and synchronize precisely to a reference time is just added value in a watch whose dial really is the centerpiece. But the movement itself, that caliber 1575 Perpetual chronometer certified movement, is in outstanding condition, and you can see the pictures of it on our website, Watch You Want. Revealing photos showing the condition of the Teflon-coated reversing wheels, the rotor, the cleanliness of the plates and the bridges, and the intact condition of the escapement and the train wheels. All high-res images on our website, and I highly encourage you to check them out, because if you're like me, you probably care about what's inside the case as well. Now, the nice thing about this red Submariner is it's a very usable watch. Having been well maintained, having clearly had factory service experience in its past because of the replacement hands and bezel, this watch has been kept up to par mechanically and aesthetically, so there really won't be too many handling restrictions on this watch. Being mindful that it is a plexiglass crystal, you're not going to want to slam it into sheetrock or car belt buckles, but at the same time, most scratches on plexiglass can be buffed out, oftentimes with nothing more than a pencil eraser, so it's got that versatility to it, as well as the charm and the beautiful unconventional refraction of light that you only get through plexiglass and really can't duplicate with sapphire. It's a romantic bubble-like look that you only get on older Rolex dive watches, and not so much the newer ones, no matter how thick their sapphire is. This watch, which wears light on the wrist, handsome in a bathing suit or a business suit, is an outstanding way to enter the world of vintage Rolex, and I can't speak highly enough about the condition of this dial. With a very light but even patina, an exceptionally clean dial base, and crisp printing, especially of that critical Submariner script, this is an awesome Mark VI red Submariner dial with a fantastic watch wrapped around it. So if you're into Rolex, specifically vintage Rolex, I have a feeling that this Rolex Oyster Perpetual Submariner reference 1680, the red sub, just may be the watch you want.